Alright, boys and girls, now we're getting into what I told you about, what you're so excited to do. I told you chapter 3 was all about adding and subtracting decimals, and you may have noticed that we haven't done it yet. Well, now is our chance. Now we're going to learn how to add decimals. Again, thinking about money, we're going to be adding money together, okay? So looking very quickly at this chart here, I made a picture representation. And we're going to start with picture representations just like we did when we were in first grade or kindergarten and started adding numbers together. We started with pictures. So as you can see, I have a big giant square there that's going to represent whole numbers. So every giant square you see represents a whole number. Every dash or rod there represents a tenth. And every little circle is going to represent a hundredth piece. So those are going to help us to be able to learn to add decimals when we first start. So let's look at how this is going to look in real life. So if I gave you this picture representation, a square, 3 lines, 5 dots, 5 circles, whatever you want to call them. Well, I know that my square is represented by a whole number, and I only have one of them, so that means I have a $1 whole dollar. I know that these lines represent tenths, or whole value for my tenths place, and there are 3 of them. So in my tenths place, directly after my decimal, I'm going to give it a 3. And then I know that those little specks represent a hundredth, which is the same as a penny, if you were wondering. And there are 5 of them. So in my hundredths place, I'm going to give it a 5. So if this was a money representation, this would be $1.35, or 1 35/100. Notice when I did this, I lined up my decimals. Keep that in mind. Always, always, always try and line up those decimals. So using our picture representation, we're going to solve this problem. 1 35/100 plus 1 87/100. So I'm going to draw my picture to represent that. I have 1 whole, I have 3 tenths, and I have 5 hundredths. Plus, I have an additional 1 whole, an additional 8 tenths, and an additional 7 hundredths. So that would be my picture representation. Now I'm going to figure out how much I have there all together. So just as I always do, I always start in my smallest place value, which in this case is our hundredths place, which is our purple specks, purple pieces, if you will. So I'm going to add up my purple pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I have 12 purple specks, which I now, I'm going to do 2 purple specks, and then I'm going to trade in those 10 for another 10th rod. So I represented my 2 specks down here. and I carried my 1/10. Now let's count our tenths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ooh, I'm going to trade in those 10 tenths for a whole dollar. I'm not done counting my tenths. Now I have another 1, 2 tenths. Now I'm going to count my whole dollars. 1, 2, 3. So as a sum, I have 3 wholes. And I know my tenths place, which is less than a dollar, so I have to have a decimal. I have 2 in my tenths place. And I have 2 in my hundredths place. So 1 and 35 hundredths plus 1 and 87 hundredths adds together to be 3 and 22 hundredths. Now let's check our work. Pictures are all well and great, but I think we can figure out another way to do this. Remember before I said to make sure you line up your decimals. So I'm going to rewrite this problem up here, 1 and 35 hundredths and 1 and 87 hundredths, with my decimals lined up and write them vertically on top of each other. Just like this. Now, as long as your decimals are lined up, you just solve it like any other addition problem. 5 and 7 is 12. 1 and 3 is 4. 4 and 8 is 12. Decimal and decimal equals decimal. 1, 1 and 1 is 3. Jumpin' Jehoshaphat. They're the same answer. So on your homework, if it asks you to draw a picture representation to solve the problem, please do that. But check it using standard algorithm addition to make sure that you are right. The key is right here. This is the key. Lining up your decimal. If you do not line up your decimal, you will not have success. Now remember, you can always add zeros to make sure that your numbers all line up and that your decimals are okay. Please bring any and all questions to class tomorrow.